In just 10 minutes, let's supercharge user experience by leveraging Smart WaaS as a service on Fantom. A few weeks ago, we announced our modular Smart WaaS as a service, essentially meaning native modular account abstraction functionality within our WaaS as a service tech stack. So onboarding a user through their social login directly into a smart account, and then facilitating full stack account abstraction, including Gasless Transactions, batch transactions, session keys, and so on. Within our Smart WaaS as a service, we've been working to expand to as many chains as possible. Most recently, this was Fantom. Yesterday, we posted an announcement detailing our complete Smart WaaS as a service integration on Fantom mainnet and testnet. This means that as a Fantom developer, you can enable complete ERC-437 account abstraction initiated completely by embedded wallets with social logins. This fundamentally transforms the core user experience present within many applications and unlocks nearly infinite possibilities in regards to how users interact with your application. So in just 10 minutes, we're going to build a demo application that onboards a user through either their Google account or Twitter account, creates a SimpleAccount instance, and sends a sample gasless user operation. So let's jump right into it. So to initially set some expectations, the application that we'll be writing today will be about 100 lines of code, and it'll simply just handle social login, the assignment of a smart account, along with sending a sample user operation. In this case, just a simple FTM burn, all of which is going to be routed through the Fantom testnet. And of course, we'll be using our native bundler and paymaster built into the Particle account abstraction SDK. So to get started, let's first import a few different base libraries. We can start with React and specifically use state as well as use effect. We can also import Particle network from @particle-network/auth. We can also import particle provider, which of course will be @particle-network/provider. And it's not required, but in this case, we can import Fantom testnet from @particle-network/chains. Basically what this does is just provide us with an object that contains the name and the chain ID for the Fantom testnet. Then perhaps most importantly, we can import AA wrap provider, smart account, and send transaction mode. This will come from @particle-network/AA. Finally, we can just import ethers along with notification from anti. Then of course we can also throw in our CSS, which in this case will just be ./app.css. And perfect. That's each of our required base libraries imported. Let's move on to doing some initial configuration before we create our main app component. We can begin doing that by creating a variable called config. Within config, we'll need to store 3 key values. This will be our project ID, our client key, and our app ID. These values are fundamentally how we connect our application with the Particle dashboard and are required for Particle auth to work properly. To retrieve these values of project ID, client key, and app ID, we can head over to the Particle dashboard and create a new project. All right, so I'm here on the Particle dashboard. I can click on add new project. I'll name this Fantom demo and click save. And now with this open, I'll need to create a new application. I can choose between iOS, Android, and web, although of course in this case I'm building a web app, so I can click on web. I'll name this again, probably just Fantom demo, and I'll throw in the domain in which this app is hosted right here. Although if you're running it on localhost, feel free to use a placeholder if you haven't deployed it just yet. From here, we can copy the project ID, the client key, and the app ID. With these copied and thrown into our environment variables, we can start by filling out this config object. Let's begin with project ID, which in my case will just simply be process.env.react app project ID. We can do the same thing for client key, along with app ID. With that config object built, we can move on to our 2 primary variables that we need to configure. This will be Particle and Smart Account. Let's start with Particle and just simply set that to new Particle network. Within Particle, we can start by passing in our config. And then additionally, we'll need to set the chain name as Fantom testnet.name. Same thing with the chain ID. And then we can also set wallet, which is an object that in this case will just simply contain display wallet entry as true. This will just throw the Particle pop-up modal within your UI by default on the bottom right of the application. Let's move on to the second key variable here, which is smart account. We can set this equal to new smart account. Then of course we can pass in new Particle provider, which will take particle.auth. Then we can open that up here. Similar to the declaration of Particle, we can pass in our config object. Then we'll just need to set one parameter, which in this case will be AA options. And here we can select the specific smart account implementation that we'd like to use within our application. At the moment, Fantom mainnet and testnet only support SimpleAccount. So we can set that just by doing simple and then setting the chain ID to Fantom testnet.id, then the version to 1.0.0. Okay, so before we start building our main app component, we just have 2 more main things to do. First is setting up our custom ethers provider, which is just an 1193 provider implementation for account abstraction to essentially use ethers as we would normally, but in this case, transactions will actually be user operations. So we can do this in custom provider and do new ethers.providers.web3 provider. And we can pass in new AA wrap provider, which will take 2 parameters, smart account and send transaction mode.gasless. We can close it off here with any. By setting send transaction mode.gasless as the second parameter in a wrap provider, we'll be routing all of our transactions through the built-in Particle testnet paymaster, which means that our user operations will be sponsored. So we won't be paying any gas fees in this case. Okay, so finally what we can do is do particle.set ERC4337, throw in name as simple and version as 1.0.0. Basically what this does is just tell the actual wallet UI that we want to use a smart account. We can finally move on to creating our main application. We can call this app. Let's start by defining a few different states. The first will be user info associated with set user info. And additionally, we can do balance and set balance. We're also going to need to start by opening a quick use effect to make sure that the balance reflected on the front end stays consistent and updated. So we can do that with use effect. And this will be quite simple. We can just check if user info is defined. Of course, by default, this will be null. So if a user isn't logged in, then this conditional will of course return false. But if a user is logged in, then we can call a function that we'll write in a moment called fetch balance. And then this will be dependent upon the status of user info. Okay, so now we can actually write that fetch balance function that I just mentioned. This will be quite simple. We're just going to be pulling the balance of the associated address after a user has logged in. So we can just call this fetch balance. And in here, we can start by defining address as await SmartAccount.get address. This will retrieve the address of the associated smart account that we set up prior. Below this, we can pull the balance itself in a variable called balance. And we can do that just by doing await custom provider.get balance and then passing in address. Then we can update the balance state by doing set balance ethers.utils.format ether and then passing in balance. This will save balance as an ether value rather than by default a way value. We'll need to actually create the logic for our social login. So the process of getting a user into a smart account purely with, in this case, their Google account or Twitter account, although we support a number of different authentication mechanisms, but we're going to stick to those for now. Let's call this handle login. This will take one parameter called preferred auth type, and we can basically do all of the handling with a one-line conditional. Let's save that in a variable called user. And essentially what we're going to do is check if the user is logged in. In this case, I actually want to do this with particle.auth.isLogin. In this case, what we'll be doing is checking if user is logged in. If they aren't logged in, then we can do await particle.auth.login and then pass in preferred auth type. Otherwise, if they are logged in, then we can assign the information of their profile to this user variable. Then finally, we can just simply call set user info and pass in user. And there we go. 2 lines, and that's our entire logic for the social login side of things. Let's also set up a very simple logout handling function. We can just call this handle logout, and that'll just simply be mapped to particle.auth.logout. All right, so we're almost done. Now that we have the social login set up to actually create or log into an account, let's create our function where we're executing the sample user operation that I mentioned earlier. We can call this execute user op. And to start in here, we can define signer as custom provider.get signer. Then under this, we can define our transaction object. We can do this in TX. Basically, with this sample transaction, I just want to send 0.001 Fantom to a dead burn address. So just burning some Fantom. To do this, we can just set the to value as this address right here. And we can set the value to ethers.utils.parse ether. This will convert the ether value of 0.001 to way. We can simply send that transaction in a variable called TX response and do await signer.send transaction, then pass in TX. And once it has been sent and we receive sort of the transaction receipt, we can throw a notification.success and just pass in message as transaction successful. Then the description can be set to json.stringify TX response. All we have left to do now is structure all of this and map it to the front end in our JSX. We can do this in a return statement, and this can get a little bit redundant, so I'm going to skip over this part, but I'll be back in 1 second with all of this done. Okay, so now our JSX is done. As you can see, it's pretty simple. I'm checking if user info is defined. So if somebody has logged in or not. If the user has not logged in, then we have the login section here, which is just either sign in with Google or sign in with Twitter. Then once they have logged in, then we change the page to this profile card that displays the balance in FTM, displays their name, and of course the 2 buttons, execute user operation and log out. So closing this off here, we can just simply do export default and then app. We're now done, so we can go ahead and run it and see if it works. And there we go. Looks like it worked. As you can see, we have our main page here. We can go ahead and choose sign in with Google. As you can see, I have all my Google accounts here. I'll go ahead and choose this one right here. I have the name of my account, proxy. I have the amount of FTM I have at the moment, 4.9. Again, this is on testnet. We have our wallet modal pop-up right here. As you can see, just like we said it, I'm signed into a simple account on the Fantom testnet. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a try. And click execute user operation. As you can see, we have our confirmation pop up right here. So we can click on confirm, and there we go. Transaction successful. And we have all of the main transaction details right here. Before ending it off here, I want to highlight that if you're on Fantom mainnet, we have our Omnichain Paymaster to sponsor gas fees. You can deposit USDT on either Ethereum mainnet or BNB chain. And then whenever a transaction passes your sponsorship conditions, then you can sponsor it with the USDT. We'll automatically do the conversion and pay for it on Fantom. So you just need to deposit on one chain. It will be automatically consumed for every other chain, including Fantom, that you require the sponsorship for. We have a lot more coming, both in terms of Smart WaaS as a service, as well as our Intent Fusion protocol, omnichain account abstraction, and ZK WaaS. So if you'd like to learn more, head over to particle.network and feel free to give our web demo a try, which is linked below. Additionally, if you'd like to read the full article for the Fantom Smart WaaS as a service announcement, then you can also find that linked below.